recording in progress. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Renee Garrett and I'm your Speech Therapy PD podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few items to alert you to. Each episode is 60 minutes and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEU. If you're joining us for this live episode and your state license requires live CEUs, please complete all course modules, including the one that says complete course before the end of the day on your Speech Therapy PD account. Here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. Lauren Schwabish even practiced it and I still messed it up. Lauren receives financial compensation from Summit Education and MedBridge for recorded webinars. She's a vendor with Brain Injury Services in Northern Virginia and a consultant for CANDO multiple sclerosis. Lauren will receive an honorarium from Speech Therapy PD for participating as a guest on this podcast. Her non-financial disclosures are that she is a professional advisory board member of Stroke Comeback Center, an advisory board member of the Dementia Society of America, a founding board member of A Purposeful Day, a volunteer group facilitator for the National Aphasia Association. My financial disclosures is that I'm the owner and founder of BrainBridge Connect, and as the host of this podcast, Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, and other webinars on Speech Therapy PD, I do receive financial compensation. I'm also an adjunct instructor at both James Madison University and Old Dominion University. My non-financial disclosure is that I am the secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Questions can be written in the chat box or the Q&A and will be answered at the end of the presentation. Now we welcome Lauren Schwabish, MS, CCC-SLP, who's the owner of Neuro Speech Services, a private practice based in Northern Virginia, specializing in person-centered assessment and treatment of cognitive communicative disorders related to stroke, acquired brain injury, mild cognitive impairment, ADHD, and other neurologic and neurodegenerative conditions. Lauren has over 25 years of experience working in hospitals and acute rehabilitation centers. She's passionate about providing meaningful and accessible health education about the brain to patients, families, and healthcare professionals. Lauren is committed to empowering communities with evidence based information and best practices in brain health behaviors. Lauren, welcome. So nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you. I'm a big fan, big listener of the podcast, so it is an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And we're both in Virginia, so that's nice because we're in the same time zone. So
Yeah.
easy to coordinate that. So one thing I always like to start with is just sharing people's why, if you're comfortable sharing that. Like, how did you get into this field? Were you led there for a specific reason? Did it just sort of happen?
I feel like I had a lot of very sort of critical moments from high school that sort of led me directly straight to through my career. So very early on in high school, I was exposed to a speech pathologist who came to my high school to talk about her work in head and neck cancer.
Oh,
And
wow.
she came to show us an electrolarynx, and she was the mom of one of my classmates. And I think that that was really critical. So I could see this as a thing people do, right? And so it's actually a reason why I go to my kids' high school to talk to the sophomores every year, right? Because who knows where the future speech pathologist, is going to be sitting. So that was one thing that kind of just taught me that this was a profession one could have. And then as a senior in high school, I ended up taking American Sign Language, which now is offered at my kids' high school. But at the time, I had to drive to the New York School for the Deaf. It was kind of far away from my house, and I took ASL classes with a deaf instructor. And that was a real moment where I just sort of had this epiphany that not everyone can just open their mouth and verbally communicate. Like it was a real aha moment. I hadn't encountered that at all. So that sort of pointed me towards college, and I started taking communication disorders classes at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I just loved them. I just soaked it up. It was the instruction that was just lighting, it was lighting something within me. And then when I was a almost senior in college, my mom called me. She was in New York. I was in Madison for the summer, and she said, "You need to come home because I have a brain tumor." And
Oh,
so
wow.
I came home. She had a meningioma. She's doing great, just turned 80, so she's all good. But that was my first encounter with, I would say, like the brain, right? And having a personal stake in it. And I was at the hospital when she had her procedure, and they took out the tumor and helped her through her recovery. And then went back into my senior year. And again, the timing was kind of magical because I was taking a neuro class. And I had a one-on-one relationship with my instructor who took me and like had a brain in like a bucket, in formaldehyde. And he took it out and he showed me where my mom's tumor was. And
Oh,
that for me
wow.
was just taking this like very personal, scary thing to happen to, a young person. And it really helped me to understand just more about my experience and more about why I wanted to be in neuro rehab. And so from there, just went to grad school, and then, ended up getting a CFY in a large city hospital where I got to work with all sorts of diagnoses. So I've really been lucky all along the way to have opportunities and moments that led me to this field. And my husband always tells me, he's like, it's so unusual that you sort of have always known what you wanted to do. But I just count my blessings that way.
Well, yeah, and I think that the family piece of it is a huge part because don't have the same story, but I have a similar story that kind of led me to that the path of this career as well. And it definitely changes your perspective and gives you um just a different mindset and a different approach to how you view patient education and caregiver education, which I know you're a big proponent of as well, as advocating for groups that maybe don't have as much, I don't want to say notoriety, maybe that's not the right wording, but don't have as much visibility, which is what we're going to talk about tonight is people who have aphasia who are parenting kids that maybe, maybe they're younger kids, maybe they're middle school, high school, but that's not something that I think a lot of us are well versed in or maybe see a ton of. We might see a few cases like that. I mean, I worked in neuro rehab and inpatient rehab and outpatient for a long time, and the number of most of my parent folks have been patients that were TBI patients or patients with something like a brain tumor. They weren't necessarily patients with aphasia. It was more cognitive communication,
Mhm.
things like executive function disorders. So, where did you start thinking about this life role of parenting as, it kind of comes along with aphasia?
Sure. Well, it really started with the woman who sort of inspired me to open up my practice. I had been working in inpatient rehab um, as a rehab clinical specialist, and she was visiting her family in Virginia. She was living in New York, a woman in her 40s, and she had ended up having a massive aneurysm rupture. She had a stroke. And
Mhm.
so I was sort of helping out with this case. Um, and she had a 5-year-old at the time, and she was, busy professional, and she's living with her parents and her husband, and they're just trying to make sense of this, crisis. And so, um, cut to she's discharged to home. I ended up starting to see her. She really inspired me to, pursue, um, I would say more of like it's kind of, it's sort of, I would say she was one piece that really inspired me to start this sort of private practice where you're going in home and doing really high quality neuro rehab. And it was interesting when I sat with her at her kitchen table at her parents' house and I sort of said, I was showing her the life interest and value cards really to try to figure out like what did she want to communicate about. And meanwhile, her husband and her parents are sort of, they've assumed the role of parent for her, right? Because of her aphasia, and she had a number of physical disabilities as well. And so I had heard everything about her prior to her stroke. She was like the mom who was coordinating the moms in the building, and she was, having these birthday parties and so affectionate and had a really wonderful bond with her son. And when we went through the life interests and value cards, she did not really identify parenting as a life value. She wanted to go shopping and she wanted to like ride a bus. um, she wanted to do other things that were not really parenting focused, and yet the parenting demands were pretty significant. So I knew I wanted to reconnect her with this part of her identity. So I started looking around to see, what resources are out there, and there wasn't that much. So for us, we were really trying to take that life participation approach and figure out like how do we define what parenting looks like for her? How do we help her to feel connected to that? What activities are available to her as a parent, and how do we sort of repair this bond that had been broken? And I'm a mom. I have 2 kids. So I think that that really helped me to sort of think about, what would be relevant for her? What did she do before? And then just try to facilitate that. So that's sort of how she's really like my origin story. Um, and it was really, I think, the start of me thinking about parenting very specifically. And I had honestly had those patients like you had those younger, TBI or other people are in the hospital. And I don't know that I ever considered parenting as
Yeah.
explicitly as I did with this case. She was really someone who taught me a lot.
Yeah, no, I think that's super interesting and very valid because we often are looking at executive functioning like can you drive your kids to school, but not necessarily can you communicate with your children? Can you be in the kitchen cooking dinner? And, I know for me, I also have two, my kids are older now, adults, but I remember those times in, middle school, particularly when it's kind of tough, and high school when it's really tough. And one of the places we connected was when I was cooking dinner, the kids would come and sit at the kitchen table and do their homework. And those were places where we could have the kind of more informal conversations, but that's where you kind of learn the bones of what happened during their day. That if you're asking them really pointed questions where you're laser focused on looking at them and communicating, they're not necessarily sharing that. So I think that's a really valid space to be in, and really interesting to learn how you decided to pitch the Parenting with Aphasia group because you didn't go small. You went to the National Aphasia Association, which is huge and much needed. So, how did that kind of catapult from this experience with this client into that?
Yeah, so she was really lucky in that, in Northern Virginia, we have the Stroke Comeback Center, which is a
Mhm.
wonderful community program. And so she was doing, community-based therapy there, but she was able to tell me at the time that there was really no one like her. There were a lot of older adults. Same, we mostly would see like in the rehab gym where we would see, grandparents age individuals. And she was sort of just like, where are the other moms with aphasia? And I was like, yeah, where are they? And realized that there was no communication group. So was lucky enough to pitch this to the National Aphasia Association. They were down. And so I started the Parenting with Aphasia group. And it meets once a month and it's free and it's virtual. And we have people who come from Canada. I've had someone come from Australia. I mean, they're all over.
So
And
cool.
and almost universally, people say that they've never seen someone else like them. So it really
Mm.
speaks to how lacking in community, these younger people with aphasia who are raising children, they don't see other folks who are going through similar situations as them. They may have friends who have kids and they may see people who have aphasia, but rarely has anyone found that sense of community. So it's, I'm a facilitator, it's not therapy, but it's just a chance for people to get together. And typically what we have people try to talk about is, tell us about your kids. How many kids do you have? What are their names? How old are they? We talk about parenting highs, like what's going well, and then parenting struggles. And it's essentially like a parenting, just sort of brainstorming group where we can all get together and help someone figure out, how can they start to volunteer at the school? How can they handle a kid who's, co-sleeping and they want to get them into their own bed? So it's sort of, it's parenting advice that I would say is aphasia friendly. And it's really a chance for people, like all parents, to get together and just kind of, commiserate, celebrate. It's a really wonderful community. And it's just a chance for people to see other folks like themselves.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I think, you've kind of touched on the parenting specific skills that you're looking at and how it's important for people to realize this sense of connection to other people who have similar challenges. But can you break down the communication skills needed for young children versus maybe school age? And I think that's a fascinating I'm fascinated to hear this because I think about like my grandson is 3.5, and so how would this work out for him with his parents being in their 30s? His grandparents are we don't talk about what age we are, but thinking about you know that age versus like our neighbor kids who are older versus thinking about like I mentioned my kids when they were middle school and high school age.
Yeah. One of the things I always think about parenting, and this is why I'm so like passionate about it, is that when someone develops aphasia suddenly, right, due to a brain injury or stroke, work can go, on the side. People can, get out on disability or they take a break from work and other responsibilities can be put on pause. But parenting never goes away, right? Even in your worst state, when you're in the hospital, you're still a parent, your kid still needs you. So I think that's one of the things that's really important to think about. And little kids, they need affection and reassurance, right? They need us to sing to them and they need us to be able to teach them language, right? So some of the people in the parenting group, they had a stroke when they were pregnant or when their baby was born. And so part of their recovery is to be able to teach their child language, right? So some of them will tell these stories where they're like, yeah, I could say one word and my kid could say one word, right? And like who was gonna, grow the vocabulary faster? Um,
Wow. Yeah.
Little kids need safety instructions, right? If a child's going to do something dangerous, a parent needs to be able to say, stop, or don't do that, and quickly and urgently. And so one parent in our group will say, her child would have been like in the street to the other road, by the time she said, stop, when he was in the yard and, running into the street. So she just couldn't get her language together quick enough. Um, they need us to tell them about their routines, when to put on their shoes, then it's time to go to bed. They need us to read them stories. They need a lot of, I would say, very specific nurturing language. And it's not only what little kids need, but sort of the who else is interacting with the parent, right? They're going to the pediatrician. How do they
Yeah.
talk to the doctors? They might be dropping a child off at daycare. How do they talk to the teachers? Do they understand their child when their child is asking them a question or telling them a long, convoluted story that has, endless tangents? So little kids really have a lot of very specific needs. That makes sense, right, to us.
Yeah.
And then as you get into those like school age kids and high school kids, then you're looking at things like homework, right? Where the demands are getting higher. Some of my parents have said, reading is okay, but numbers are, really tricky. And so I can't help with any math. You have to sign permission slips and you have to read, we're a very tech-based parenting, community now. So it's emails from the school, it's text messages from other parents. There's online portals that people have to navigate. So it's all the language around parenting. And then there's things like screen time, right? So it's hard enough for a parent without aphasia to get a kid to, follow the household rules when it comes to stopping gaming or put down your phone, right? Or you can only watch one more show. And so think about all of that. And then I think they're a very universal experience, no matter what age kids you have, is the neurofatigue that comes with any type of brain injury,
Mm-hmm.
or the sense of overstimulation with a lot of noise, right? And what do we know about kids is they come with a lot of noise. So little kids are screaming and crying, right? And that's how they communicate. But that noise for a parent who may be, getting a little bit overstimulated, or the fatigue. So, like the parenting demands of getting someone to get to bed on time at night when you yourself are like, so exhausted. It really presents, sort of very specific challenges to the parent with aphasia, where parenting is hard enough, and then parenting with aphasia is like next level challenge.
Yeah, because I know my daughter goes through that with my grandson of which she always says we do weird things here at my house because he says things like, I'm tired, so I'm gonna go upstairs. And at her house she has to lay down with him and so she's like, I'm exhausted, I've been working all day and now I have to like still do this thing that seems very insignificant, but I can remember being a newer, younger parent uh, at a much younger age with a lot more energy and still
Uh-huh.
feeling that. So compound that with something like a TBI, a stroke,
Mhm.
resulting aphasia. Yeah, I can see where we've got people with sleep challenges, that are in their midst of their recovery. Maybe they also have components of mental health issues with depression and anxiety. Other things, like you said, just trying to navigate tech, because tech can be visually overstimulating. It can be a challenge for reading comprehension. It can be a challenge to just navigate hierarchy of menus, right? So we're
Right.
thinking about um, different apps. Schools now rely heavily on schedules and calendars that are both electronic, but also require a component of email, verification things, all the
All
things.
the things, right. And being an
Yeah.
advocate for your child. There's one mom who is outstanding in our group. She was a special ed teacher, and she has two children who have special needs. And
Hmm.
so part of what I think has really been, and she's like a mama bear. I mean, she will, she's got aphasia, she's got some, cognitive challenges, but she is in those IEP meetings, right? Which are not easy meetings.
Right.
And she is as prepared as can be, and she advocates for herself because ultimately she's advocating for her children. And so there's so many different situations where, what your core value is, which is standing up for your child, making sure they have what they need to be able to be successful at school or in sports or, extracurriculars, and really thinking about how much effort and how much work they put in to manage their aphasia, to make sure everyone else can understand them. I mean, it's really, truly impressive.
Yeah, and thinking about moving into the high school age years, well, it kind of starts at middle school too. Um, but particularly high school, your high schoolers are building their own resume to um, get into colleges if that's their pathway, or they're navigating. Do they want to do something more like a vocational program? And so they're still building like their extracurricular activities. I know for me, I had two kids who only went to the same school 1 year out of all the years that they went to school. So we were always in two separate schools, always in two separate or three or four separate activities. My husband was military, so I was often by myself. So a lot of that navigation that we consider challenging just as a parent who's parenting,
Mhm.
and then you compound that with a communication disorder. Um, yeah, I think it's really important to not only be advocates for those patients, but to help connect them like you're doing with this group that's so important because it is important for them to see it's not just me, I'm not the only one. Um, that social interaction too helps build confidence, right?
Mhm.
So they're building confidence amongst people that are their peers who are experiencing similar things, but that empowers them to then go back to what we would consider, I hate using the word normal, but a more sanitized environment of people who haven't had a stroke or
Mhm.
TBI,
Mhm.
don't have necessarily cognitive communication challenges.
It's a really uplifting group. We had one season, it was like maybe a year or two ago, where we had an SLP who was in, I think it was almost like a residential inpatient program. It was definitely like people who were, it wasn't such, like, wasn't like a hospital, but it was, and she'll forgive me if she's listening to this, but it was people who were very newly living with aphasia. And she had like maybe two or three of them. I think it was probably one of those just, magical moments where there's enough of a core community. And she would have them log into the group from their program. And they were very newly living with aphasia. And here they were seeing many people who are chronically living with aphasia too. And, so the group that was attending, they had very limited language. They had never been out in the world yet. And then you had these survivors who were sometimes 5, even 10 years living with aphasia. And they were able to just give such guidance and reassurance and saying, I know it's hard, it's going to get easier, your kids are going to be so excited to have you, and here's some things you might be able to look forward to. And it was just, I don't think any professional could have given that type of advice the way that these parents living with aphasia did.
Yeah, and I think it really speaks to the older models of social communication. And I know even when I was a student, well, we had an aphasia group at our university, um, and it's had various iterations and gone kind of come and gone by the wayside depending on who is working in the clinic. But um, one of the things that you see with these, like the Stroke Comeback Center, for example, or the Adler group, they are doing such great things with group communication where we're seeing this like piggyback support where the other patients who maybe aren't their communication challenges aren't as severe as maybe the person sitting next to them, and they jump in and they want to help, and they want to help peer coach them and support them. And I think that is just it really speaks to the life participation approach, and how it's important for us as clinicians to model that, but it's also very important for those patients with aphasia to see that there are other people that are like them who can not only provide like a model or cues as well, but to support them and be like, yeah, you can get better. This is what I tried. This is what worked for me, or this didn't work, but maybe it'll work for you. And just provide that level of encouragement that, we like to think that we as clinicians can provide that, but it doesn't hit the same way as it does when it comes from your peers. Is that
Oh, yeah.
right?
Totally, totally. I think it's our job is to educate people to know that aphasia groups, no matter where they are, and if they're virtual, you can find them sometimes in your community, but sometimes you have to go online, that they provide a community that is invaluable,
Hmm.
to feeling less alone, to getting ideas, to getting inspiration. And SLPs can help facilitate that, right? To maybe encourage someone to join a group, to help them to figure out how to get the link in their inbox. Even to form a small group in your own clinic. If I had two patients and they were very similar, I would, I'm actually about to do that with two clients of mine that I see virtually, they both have TBIs and they're both dads. And I just sort of think that now that I have this, like, once I put on my parenting, lenses, I can't take them off anymore. So even though they're not dealing with aphasia, they have a lot in common. And that life role is so essential. I really want them to be able to have their own friendship, right? And building a friendship and establishing a connection that is just the thing they have in common is, that they're both dads who are, living with TBI, just to really be able to connect and facilitate that any chance you get.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to going back a little bit and talking about how parents who have aphasia differ from other people who are living with aphasia. And so thinking about just those challenges and how they're different, parents versus not parents. So talk to us about that, but then I also want to get into the role of co-parenting because I think that's a big topic issue as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think one of the things that is really important to understand when it comes to younger people who have stroke is that they are not only dealing with their aphasia or their cognitive impairment, but they are oftentimes dealing with loss of role at work, right? So many of them will be, out, they need to work, they had been working, work is essential for their financial health. And so all of a sudden you're sort of like plucked out of that. So I think that's one life role that really gets altered, and their relationship with coworkers and friends and things like that. There's a lot of financial stressors that maybe an older adult who's had a stroke, maybe more financially secure just because they've had a chance to work and save for longer before they encountered disability. So I think that is one thing that is definitely common in the parenting group, but also as I've worked with younger people with aphasia, those considerations. There's a lot of family stress, right? So, and we'll talk about co-parenting, but the person who's, caring for you had been your partner. They weren't in that caregiving role. And maybe the person who developed aphasia was the caregiver, was the breadwinner, was the person who kind of did everything. And so now you have um, this family stress. I think you'd mentioned the confidence and the self-esteem and also the limited peer support. Most people who have stroke, if you talk to older people, in their 70s and 80s, someone's got something going on. Some friend is dealing with this, and oh, my neighbor's dealing with that. And there's much more of a shared experience of like, oh, he's going to the doctor's office, and this
Yeah.
one's having a colonoscopy, so that's sort of like very much everyone's sort of in the same boat. But when you're a younger person who's developed some sort of brain injury, you don't have a ton of friends who also can relate to what you're going through. And so I think that prevents people from feeling that sense of support and the increased risk of depression, anxiety. And also because stroke is the leading cause of long-term disability, these folks are surviving for sometimes decades.
Hmm.
And think of all the speech therapy services and interventions that are given to them immediately after their injury so that they'll get therapy, inpatient, outpatient, if they're lucky, in the community. And then they have this lot of like long time, years of life where they're not necessarily encountering or receiving skilled therapy services, which is why these community groups are so important. And even advocating to say, as you develop new goals, let's say, you had been out of work and so work wasn't a goal. And now maybe you're looking at getting into a volunteer position and really knowing to say, hey, you know what? Speech therapy services are really appropriate to help you develop the strategies and skills you need to be able to get back into the community. Or hey, you're going back to work, you're going back to school, well, that's another opportunity to make sure that your language skills and your cognitive strategies are in place to help you with that. So I think that's another thing that's very important to make sure that we really stand up and advocate for these, whether they have kids or not, those younger survivors of stroke.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, one of the things I speak out certified for Parkinson's disease, and one of the things that, is kind of well known and um, perpetuated in the Parkinson's community is that you're probably always going to need like a touch up or a tune up throughout the progression of the disease. And so, why isn't that true for our younger stroke survivors? Like you mentioned, when their goals change as they continue to age, because we are seeing that a lot of our stroke survivors, it's not necessarily due to cardiovascular disease or hypertension, a lot of times it's something like a aneurysm, Chiari malformation, these other things that people are a patent for Valley that people are born with that they don't know that they have until they know that they have it,
Yeah.
right? Because something catastrophic happens. And so I think that's an important place for us to continue with our community advocacy and our community efforts because our education continues to be poor for stroke prevention, but yet it also continues to be poor for advocating for additional services because we know that stroke recovery doesn't end at month 3 or month 6. And that was sort of the old school mind frame is that, oh, you get to 6 months, you're good. Or you get to 1 year and you're good and that's it. You're not going to ever see any improvements. You're not going to make any changes. This is where you're going to be for the rest of your life. And I think that's just such an opportunity for us to be loud,
Oh yeah, I
make
hate that so
noise.
much when people say like, "Oh, well, we've got to get going." And there's like an urgency, and it's sort of I always try to feel what is the urgency? What's really driving you to seek services? And they're like, "Well, they said, 6 months or 12 months or whatever it is." And I'm like, "That is crazy." There's a mom in our parenting group who had a stroke, I think like 11 or 12 years ago, and she keeps a notebook in which she writes any gain she makes, any success. She was in an art show. It could be a parenting move. It could be something physically that she's done. She writes down everything that she says is an improvement, and it is like the most inspiring thing because I routinely call on her to share this notebook idea with other people because especially when you're a younger person and you're looking at the basically like more than half of your life ahead of you and you're thinking, oh my
Yeah.
God, I'm not going to get better. Nothing beats hearing from somebody that they continue to cite successes, right? And also when it comes to parenting, think about the skills that you have when your services wrap up, after your outpatient, discharges you, your kids continue to grow and to change. And so why not get that tune up to say, hey, you know what, kids going to high school, how's your communication going? What are your needs? Maybe it's someone who is thinking about wanting to return to driving so they can take their kids to activities. They
Hmm.
need an opportunity to maybe get that OT eval or work with a speech therapist on how they're going to be able to communicate in the community, right? At these different levels. So these folks, especially, we really need to make sure that they know that services should always be available to them if there's a goal that is worthy of working on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's a good space to move into talking about co-parenting because you kind of touched on that of how, maybe the person that has now had a stroke was the caregiver of someone else. Maybe they were the primary breadwinner. Maybe they were um, I mean, like for me, I was not a single parent, but the role of a military spouse is very similar to that, and that we experience long periods of time. It's a lot different now than it was 20 years ago. There were times when my husband was deployed where we weren't able to communicate via
Mhm.
email, via phone. There were times when it was snail mail letters that came 6 weeks after they were written. And I know it was worse than that the years before me, and it's been better than that years since. But, imagine yourself in that role and how do you co-parent in that space with all these other life things, right? Parameters of life are a big thing.
Yeah, and this is where you want to make sure that there's, psychology, neuropsychology, someone who can do some kind of counseling, even to connect, the spouses of parents living with aphasia so that they know they have support because it's true. I mean, you have a family that was sort of chugging along, kids, errands, two jobs, dealing with birthday parties on the weekends. Like you just think you have a rhythm, and then all of a sudden everything changes, right? And so the stress on that co-parent is tremendous, right? They too have to take off of work during the initial phases because they're just trying to figure out what happened. This is so unexpected, and so it is really tricky. I think that's another sense of um making sure that those folks know that they too warrant the support and that they should be getting, being in some type of, even if it's another peer, like another spouse of someone who's dealing with this. We don't really have any co-parent group right now that I can think of, but I think being able to connect people wherever they're at. And then also letting this parent know, this other parent, the co-parent, that there's a lot of responsibilities we want to return back to the person living with aphasia, right? So saying, what part of the routine can we take back from you? Because a lot of times these co-parents have had to take over parenting like 100%, or it's split between the parents and, grandparents. And so really being
Mm-hmm.
able to say, I want to help you out by figuring out what part of the routine can this person with aphasia be tackling so that you no longer have to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's setting up, if it's, setting out, the shoes and the backpack and everything for, the day before. Maybe they do that, after dinner before they get super tired, or maybe they're reading a bedtime story, or they're watching a movie with the kids, right? Which is something that's really relaxing, and, it doesn't have to be, a language intense experience, but really saying like, let's value parenting as a skill that we want to take back. And then what are the parts of parenting that this person needs to offload themselves, to help them out. And sometimes some of our parents in the group are not residing with their co-parents, so maybe they're splitting time. Between the child is splitting time between two households and
Yeah.
figuring out, how does this co-parent who's not in your house know how to support you, and how can you advocate for, or how can you work on efficient communication between the households about the kid. So I think everybody, this is where that supported communication partner training goes so far, because we really want to reduce this very high level of stress as much as we can. So making sure that the person with aphasia has their strategies and the co-parent has strategies, and that everyone can just sort of understand what makes this family run at its best.
Do you ever incorporate the kids into, because I know you're the facilitator for the group, but do you ever incorporate the children or like teenagers into active sessions of therapy, like you would an adult co-parent or another caregiver?
In my private practice and my one-on-one therapy sessions, I include anybody who can come to therapy. I think with kids, sometimes it's, there's some good storybooks. The National Aphasia Association has a great resource list with books that you could have a kid read, or have read to them, that helps them to understand what aphasia looks like.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a matter, if they're really little and they're not really able to participate, just making them feel comfortable with you. And so maybe they'll come and show you a toy, and you can sort of like incorporate that into your aphasia therapy, so that this parent who's trying to learn from you sees that you're comfortable, or that you can modify your language when interacting with the child. Usually what happens though with a lot of the parents that are in my parenting group is the kids learn to support their parents. So they go out into the community and they're just sort of saying, "Oh, you have to give my mom a few minutes because like she has aphasia," right? So or "Mom, don't forget to write that down because otherwise you're going to forget it." So the kids are so smart. And so
Hmm.
kids end up being, really creative in how they navigate. And ultimately, like, this is their mom, it doesn't, or their dad. It doesn't matter if they have aphasia. Sometimes in the parenting group, we have this one great dad, and his girls are like, climbing all over. And so we have them in the group, and everyone just kind of like, well, as much as we can in Zoom, just radiate our love and affection for these kids. Um, but they're not really incorporated into the group as much. It's a group that meets in the evening. We try to do it after bedtime, or let, the co-parent deal with bedtime, so we can just, hang out together.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting thinking about like the dynamics of kids and how maybe there could be some fear if, especially if their parent had a really significant stroke where maybe medically there was a point where they couldn't see their parent for a long period of time. Maybe there was a surgery involved in the case of something like an aneurysm or a bleed where they had to have um, surgery and the child wasn't able to see their parent. There's some trauma and fear there for the kids, and
Mhm.
like how to, especially kids who are like elementary aged and middle school, like that age and up, because they're going to remember no, they'll know, something was wrong and I couldn't see my dad or my mom, or maybe I can't be as physically affectionate, like you mentioned, that kids need that that touch and that space with their parent. So I think that's a really interesting space too for more education for people, because I think unless you worked in this space, you're not thinking along those lines. And it was something that you mentioned early about, um, a lot of people with their stroke, they're in their 70s, 80s, 60s even, and their friend had one at church, or their neighbor down the street had something similar. And it's a different level of, I don't want to say, I guess camaraderie is a good word, right? It's a different level of connection for them than it is for someone who's, I had a 24-year-old patient when I worked in inpatient rehab who had a stroke after, like, post-pregnancy, postpartum, and
Mm-hmm.
she really got, when she initially went in, she got dismissed from the emergency room. And part of that was her profession. She was a bartender. She was on her third kid. That's what the medical record said. She was
Mm.
on her third
Oh
kid
God, the
at
judgment.
24. And I was
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, I was on my second kid at 24. So
Mm-hmm.
I just chose to have kids early. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now I'm a free bird. It's fine. So, because there's empty nest when your kids go to
Uh-huh.
college, and then there's
Okay.
free bird when they leave for real, for real.
Reaver.
So,
Okay. Good. Good to know. I'm gonna file it away. File it away for my future parenting
yeah,
aspirations.
yeah, but I think it just, there's so many differences and so many societal norms where people make these um assumptions when they see people. And again, the community education is still poor, in my opinion, for stroke community education. We kind of focus on prevention and knowing the signs, and that's great, but also knowing that sometimes this isn't necessarily preventable when you have a medical challenge that you're not aware of, that you're born with, that then precludes you to have a higher risk factor, and you don't find out about it until you do when you have a stroke.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, again, that long-term therapeutic support, I said we'd ask questions at the end, but this is kind of on topic.
Mm.
Um, so Kathy said, I love your ideas, but how do you get insurance because this is a great question. How do you get insurance companies to cover working on a new goal, say 10 years after the stroke?
Excellent question. I mean, I think
Hmm.
we could fight about insurance, there's just no right answer. I think the fact is that if you can find some good evidence to be able to support not only the insurance, the payer's understanding, but any medical professionals who could go to bat for you as well, right? So you can submit your evaluation and your treatment note, and I always like to include best practices that might come from um, Journal of Head Rehabilitation, head trauma rehabilitation, or, stroke, some sort of journal that really talks about best practices. Um, and then also making sure that their primary care doctor or their neurologist can see that that's worthy of ordering. Sometimes you might have a claim that gets denied, but if you can show, that the research says that therapy will be beneficial for this individual and the doctor is writing an order for this treatment to be happening, and you can educate everyone in that space to say why this is worthy. um I think that the denial letters are a little bit stronger. It's definitely something that is a challenge. I think that's why a community group is so important, right? Like this parenting
Hmm.
group, because I think there are a lot of people who kind of exhaust their benefits. But the fact is that you need to make a case for why this is important. So I think if you can talk about what are my skilled interventions, right? And then how am I connecting it to a life participation approach? Why is this important for this particular individual given their needs? That goes, I think, towards just advocating. And it's awful. I mean, insurances, and now it's like, forget it with premiums and Medicaid and like, oh, just
Yeah.
but just
Deductibles.
because it's hard doesn't mean we don't do it, right? We have to
Yeah.
stand up and we have to make sure that people know that these services are available and that they need to fight and the people around them need to fight as much as possible, right? I mean, obviously, if you don't get reimbursed, you can't see this individual, but I think making sure that they really know every available resource, be it a free one like the parenting group, or be it services that they might have for a brief course of therapy, even a handful of sessions for that tune-up, um,
For
that
private pay. Yeah.
right, or private pay, right? Which is something
Yeah.
that if you're saying to a parent, I think I can really help you, and here's where you may want to put some of your resources. If you can connect a skilled intervention to a direct life participation goal, that person is likely to invest in that,
Hmm.
especially if it helps them to do something they haven't been able to do.
Yeah, because when you're thinking about what deductibles look like and what copays look like after the deductible, a lot of times private pay is in sync with that. And then you can also, the patient can submit to their insurance even if you're considered out of network to see if they get anything, because something is better than nothing.
Sure,
So
sure.
I
Or
think
maybe they
that's,
have health savings, maybe they
yeah.
have an account and that health savings account can go towards those therapies. So, if they know that services are available, they can plan accordingly. They can try to save those funds for that.
Yeah, I remember when I found out my 8-year-old at the time would need glasses, and I found out how much glasses cost for an 8-year-old, and I was like, oh my gosh, because our insurance at that time did not cover it. Um, yeah, and we didn't, again, we were, military, so we didn't have a health savings account or like a flexible spending account. And so now I know that uh, the 8-year-old who's now much older than that still has to come out of pocket for glasses and contact lenses to survive life because she
I was gonna say, I mean, but like
can't
what,
see.
yeah, he needs to be
So
able to see, right?
yeah, so
So I
she's
think,
able to use
yeah.
that. And again, I would not have known that because that wasn't my experience. I didn't have access to that. So I
Hmm.
guess, you know, not only educating ourselves, but advocating. Um, we have to educate ourselves as our speech language pathology team and our multidisciplinary team members to help not only understand what those, because insurance is exhausting, let's be honest,
Hmm.
and they're all different. They all have different access points, they all have different requirements, and kind of having a basic understanding so that we can say, hey, this may be an option for you. Let me help you navigate this. It's definitely, are we insurance billing specialists? I'm not,
Me
but I'm
neither.
willing to help try to figure it out if it means that you get the access to the care that you need while the crazy world goes on and tries
Yeah.
to figure
Well,
out.
I think where we really shine is knowing what, elements of neuroplasticity, knowing
Yes.
what skilled interventions look like for aphasia care, right? So making sure that this family understands when they're fighting the good fight to be able to get reimbursed, that they have every supporting document, right, that helps to make the case that this is important. Another thing I'll say, having worked with somebody, I always say with anyone working with a brain injury, this is invisible. This is, you cannot see aphasia, you cannot see cognitive impairment, you cannot see neurofatigue. You might look great, especially for some of these younger people who may be going into this catastrophic event. Maybe they were physically healthy. There's a couple moms who were like running marathons before this.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't necessarily dealing with, decades of chronic illness, right? So they're fairly healthy. So they recover maybe physically pretty well, but that aphasia, especially for high complex demand communication, like going back to work, sitting in, a meeting, being able to really, do all of that and then go be a parent and, be taking the kid to soccer and having parent teacher conferences, that a lot of what the therapy can look like is making sure this person advocates for themselves, that they know how to explain aphasia to someone who does not understand it, that they have the tools ready and available, that they've thought about, how do I set the stage for successful communication so that I'm doing these things, but I'm also standing up for why I might need more time. Maybe I need captions on, so I can see information. Maybe I need to use some kind of strategy. So I think that's another piece too. It's not just sort of looking at, semantic feature analysis or melodic intonation or whatever some of it, especially for these very high level folks who are able to get back into the community, but are still living with aphasia,
Mm-hmm.
that we really focus on educating them about the symptoms and the contexts that are tricky, and then making sure they have ways to advocate for themselves. And that also would include possibly looking at like the Job Accommodation Network website, where we can start to help them to put together maybe accommodations for return to work, right? Because our job is to help them seek employment. And I bet if you could put that in a goal, that strategies are developed to help this person return to paid employment, that's a compelling argument to pay for services.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure you have too. And I had a younger patient, early 40s, who had a stroke as a result of cancer treatment, chemo cancer treatment that was caused some damage to his lung or his heart. Um, and he had a teenage daughter, but his goal was to return to work. That was, his daughter was great. He had a wonderful relationship, and his daughter, like you mentioned, was very much an advocate for him
Mhm.
when they would go to like her athletic events and things like that. So she was just was great. She was so helpful to him, but his thing was trying to figure out what are tasks I need to be able to do at work, because his job was a little different in that he worked in a control room in a factory, and he had not a supervisory position, but he had at the time of the stroke, he was in a training program where he could have had that upward mobility. And so he would come in, and that was often where he would start as, I want to go back to work. I don't want to be a deadbeat. I don't want to, and these were his words, I don't
Mhm.
want to be a deadbeat. I don't want to be, he would always say, I'm a man. I want to provide for my wife. And he was very traditional in that sense, that it was
Mhm.
important for him to have that feeling of confidence that he could do those things, that he could,
Mhm.
as he would say, because he said, be a man a lot. He said it a
It's a
lot.
point of pride, right? Providing for your family is one of the most important things we can do.
Yeah, but also for him, it was to be able to prove to his job and prove to the neuropsychologist who was going to be conducting testing to see if he was able to go back to work. Um, and that was the things that he wanted to work on in therapy, were very non-traditional things, like me going in another room with a walkie-talkie and communicating with him, not only with the barrier of that, because that was something he used at work, but being in a space where he couldn't see me to
Mhm.
read my nonverbals, I couldn't read his, and we couldn't communicate looking at each other and picking up on those contextual cues. And one of the OTs would always say, "Oh my gosh, this is an actual therapy. You're just playing around." Or uh, he liked to play chess, and it was something he did before his stroke. So that was one of the things when we looked at same thing, looking at his interest level. What do you want to do? I want to be able to go to the park, and if I see my old buddy who likes to play chess, I want to be able to go sit with him and play chess. I didn't know how to play chess, but he taught, that was a goal. He wanted to teach me how to play chess. And so we did that. And yeah, it didn't look like therapy in the sense of, are we using a workbook based intervention or a specific trademarked modality? No, we weren't, but it was important to the patient. It was important to his role as a parent, as a spouse, as a community member, as a colleague. So yeah, sometimes you really have to take yourself out of it, because it's really not about you,
But
right?
also, like, he was probably so satisfied after those courses of therapy, after those sessions, because you were directly targeting the skills and abilities, which, by the way, like, once you stop and say, how is cognitive communication involved in this?
Hmm.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So being able to look at any particular parenting task or work task or community task and say, okay, what is the language this person has to say or listen to or read, right? Or
Hmm.
write. It is it is so satisfying to look at any activity and be able to integrate it into therapy that workbooks are silly. And by the way, I have had so many patients because now I'm in the community, right? So if people are coming to me, they typically have gone through all sorts of iterations, right? No one is pointing to a worksheet and being like, oh my God, I love this. I love saying cat and train and bear. This was amazing therapy. No one says that. You know what they love? They love to be able to feel connected to something that they used to be able to do, right?
Yeah.
They love that. So it's just like, just talk to the patient, see what they want to do, see if they enjoy. Now, if you're training a family member in how to facilitate, let's say, communication and you need to train them on a strategy, that's a different story, right? Maybe they need something that's a little bit more structured. But in general, hats off to you. That sounds like really fun therapy to do also. And that is truly
Fun
the
for
life
us.
participation approach. That's awesome.
Yeah, and it's fun for us too because we're not
Right.
just sitting there dictating to the patient, this is what your goals are and this is what you will do today. Because it's not, it doesn't help.
My
Yeah,
whole practice is built around that kind of therapy. Today I was at a client's house. He was a wood, this is not a parent, but he was a woodworker and he specialized in historical furniture restoration. And so he is talking to me about wood and all different types of wood. And so he's working on writing the wood names, and then he's teaching me about and the last session he was making mention of a tree in his yard. And so the first thing we did when I got there, I was like, can you show me the trees in your yard? So we like walked outside and he's showing me this tree and he's showing me that tree and he's talking about them. And I'm like, okay, good. I just wanted to know what they were. And he's like, well, let's go back inside. And then he has like wood samples and I'm looking at them with a loop so I can see the wood grain. Like, we're just immersed in what is meaningful for him. And so he kind
yeah.
of steps into the role of teacher because I don't know a lot about different types of wood. Um, and I get to learn, he gets to be the leader, because that's another thing too that's really, I think, especially for these parents and talk about reconnecting people, is seeing where the strength is. And
Mm-hmm.
so many times with worksheets and with these decontextualized tasks, it is looking at, first of all, it's not personally meaningful, but also what is hard, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what is challenging? And I think the idea, like back in the day when I was doing deductive puzzles, on the worksheet, you were trying to figure out a strategy that would help that person and hope that it generalized to life. Well, what if we just skip the worksheet altogether and say, how can I see your strengths? Like, this guy has fluent aphasia. He's now a year out. He's a great communicator. His confidence was so low when I met him. And yet, at the end of the session, I can be like, you used all sorts of environmental context and you used the writing that you did last week, and you're showing me objects and you're showing me illustrations and books that you found. And all of these things accumulated together make you a wonderful communicator. And now our job is to figure out, how can you communicate with other people in your environment, right? Like the wood artisan community that you used to be a member of, or the high school across the street. Is there a shop class that we can try to figure out? So it's just, I love it. It's just the
Yeah, I
best kind of
do.
therapy when you really put on
Yeah.
that life participation lens. It's so wonderful.
Well, and so as we're kind of wrapping up, what else are you working on? Because I know you have some things behind the scenes. I know you're a big proponent and fan of patient-reported outcome measures, and as am I. So what are
Mhm.
you working on to help continue to support the community?
Yeah, so I have been so lucky that I met a real friend in Carolyn Baylor, Dr. Carolyn Baylor, who created one of my favorite patient-reported outcome measures, the communication participation item bank. I will say, as someone who's really, I am using testing to, I think, establish some critical baselines. And sometimes a payer needs that, but also just to be able to kind of say, like, tomorrow I'm doing like the Arizona spelling, like I really need to drill down and get some good data for this one particular client. But I always start with patient reported outcome measures. And so there is no patient reported outcome measure that is really targeting parenting. And so Dr. Baylor and I have been working together to develop a tool that we're very excited about. We're really trying to establish a nice researcher clinician relationship, and really trying to hear from stakeholders, parents with aphasia, to figure out, like, if you were working with a therapist, at the time of your stroke, or, you know, along the rehab trajectory, when did someone talk to you about your parenting needs? And the answer is almost never, right? And so, how
Mhm.
could we give speech pathologists a tool that would help them to understand parenting and help to sit down with someone and say, where do we need to start? What is valuable to you? What is appropriate for your child's developmental level? And how can we make that the center of therapy? And how can we, help you as your child continues to get, older and grow themselves? How can we try to come back to this inventory and figure out, well, what skills do you need now that your kid is older? So we're very excited about it. It's been such an interesting thing. And I think, honestly, before I was a parent, I would have loved a tool like this, because I think people who are maybe new in the field or younger, who don't have kids or maybe don't have friends who have kids, understanding parenting if it's not in my, in my worldview, I didn't really think about it. I was parented, but I didn't really think about parenting as a cognitive communication task. So that's my real aim here, is to say, I've had this experience, I've had this passion. How can I give this back to speech pathologists so that they can learn how to, like, from the jump, target parenting communication in their therapies?
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. It would be
Yeah. And
like a major, like, woo, I have made it in my field, and I can contribute to some type of tool that would help, to help clinicians really be the best that they can be, and also to lift up parenting as, a really critical, essential life role that merits direct service, therapy services.
well, thank you for that work, and hats off to Dr. Baylor as well. So I can't wait to see what
I
you all come
know.
up
We'll see.
with, and
Yeah.
uh, reach out if you need a tester.
Oh yeah, for sure. We were thinking about, with ASHA convention coming up, I was like, I would love to hear from, speech pathologists who were there to talk about, what they're doing with parenting. Because I bet if it was like me before I'd had these sort of like moments, I don't know that I really targeted it in therapy. But it is so important, and it doesn't need to come just because you're a parent and you can relate to your patient. But like, if it's important to your patient, we should all be working as hard as we can. So, hopefully I'll run into you and we can chat about it. And then down the road,
Yeah.
when I need to test a tool, I'll call on you first.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah,
Great.
because I was the child of a parent with aphasia, but I was an adult. I was 25 when my dad had his stroke. So it was definitely a different experience, but still, that communication piece, because I was at a different space than a 6-year-old, but still watching my dad go through pseudobulbar affect
Mhm.
and never having seen him cry was very devastating for a 25-year-old young me. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of area for expansion for that, not just for thinking of that mindset of little kids, but also parenting adult children too, because that's a whole other thing.
Right. And what 25-year-old doesn't want to call up their dad and get some advice? So, we do try to keep parenting kind of to, like, the people who are coming, it's really for like actively raising children. But the fact is that you're never not a parent, you're always having to deal with some kind of form of communication.
Hmm.
My daughter's going to be 19. She just went to college. We're texting every day, all day long, right? Just questions back and forth. So adult children, are still children, right? So when you're
Yeah.
family with aphasia, the whole family gets involved in therapy.
Yeah, that's
Whole
true.
family's
That's very
affected.
true. Yeah, very true. Lauren, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you answering my wild call of email when I asked you to be a guest. And I hope I run into you too. We'll have to make a point to meet up. But
For sure.
um, just as a reminder, if you've joined us for this live course and your state license requires live CEUs, be sure you complete all course modules, including the one that says complete course, before the end of the day on your Speech Therapy PD account. Um, Ariana, I see that you raised your hand and then you said thank you. Did you have a question before we wrap up? No, sorry. Okay, just want to make sure. All right. Well, thank you again, Lauren. It was great to meet up with you, and I hope everyone enjoyed learning from us tonight.
You as well. I also want to let you know that if anyone has any questions or resources that I did mention, but I didn't, there's no notes or anything like that, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm a big, supporter and mentor for many SLPs. So, if you're on Instagram at Neurospeech Services, and my website, neurospeechservices.com, please reach out. I do not believe in gatekeeping. I have such a passion for the kind of work that I do, and I just want to make sure people have the resources that they need. So please, if you're listening to this or you're in the chat right now, please feel free to reach out.
Thanks again, Lauren.
You're
See you
welcome.
soon.
Nice to see you.